Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera. We continue our discussion on business statistics for question 5. As I mentioned on previous session, question 5 is related to chapter 7 in business statistics, and we straight to question C as we have covered the question 5A and question 5B on our previous session. So for question C, suppose the lecturer surveys a random sample of 30 students about the amount of time they spend for business statistics each week. What are the expected value and standard deviation of the sample mean of the time spent for studying the course? So in order to answer this question, in order to answer question 5C, first you need to know that the expected value for normal distribution is equal to the average or mean value. So based on question 5, we know that the average value is equal to 120 minutes. The average time spent by student to study business statistics is equal to 120 minutes per week. Thus, we can directly tell that the expected value is also equal to 120 minutes. And in order to identify the standard deviation or standard error for this sampling distribution, so the reason why I say that for question C, we will refer this normal distribution as sampling distribution is because for question C, we have a sample of 30 students. I repeat, the reason why we refer the question or question C as sampling distribution because for question C, we have a sample of 30 students. So in order to identify the standard deviation for a sampling distribution, or in other words, in order to identify the standard error for our sample distribution, our sample normal distribution, we have to divide the standard deviation that we have with the square root of our sample size. So in this case, since we know that the normal, if we can call it normal distribution, is equal to 20 minutes, we divide it with the size of the sample that we have. In this case, 30. So by dividing the two, we will be able to obtain the standard error that is equal to 3.65. So in a sampling distribution, our standard deviation is also referred as standard error. We also call the standard deviation as standard error whenever we want to estimate the standard deviation of a sampling distribution that is normally distributed. I repeat, we also refer the standard deviation as the standard error when we address questions that is related to sampling distribution that is normally distributed. So it is very important to identify the standard deviation based on our sampling. because in order to convert the z value, in order to convert the x value into z value, when we try to estimate the probability, okay, when we wanted to estimate the probability for a normal distribution based on a sample of, say, for example, 30 students, we have to at first convert the standard deviation into a standard error. Okay, in other words, we have to convert, we have to divide the standard deviation that we have with the square root of sample size in order to obtain the standard error. So this standard error is the standard deviation of a normal distribution based on a sample. So we can refer to question D in order to understand what I just mentioned just now. So question D, if 30 students are randomly selected, what is the probability that the average time spent for studying exceeds 110 minutes? So in order to identify the probability value based on a normal distribution, as I mentioned during the previous session, first step is to convert our x value into z value. Okay? We convert our x value into z value. And we know that in question D, our x value is equal to 110 minutes. So this is the x value that we wanted to determine the probability from. So just like in previous session, we will use the same formula yet slightly modified in order to convert the x value into the z value. So here, our z value, since we wanted to estimate, the probability for a normal distribution based on a sample, thus our z value, the formula to obtain the z value will be slightly modified, where in our numerator, we maintain the same numerator as previous session, x minus mu, our expected value or our mean value based on a situation, divided by standard deviation over square root sample size. So this is what I mentioned before this. In order to convert the z value, in order to convert the x value into z value for a normal distribution based on a sample size, we have to transform the normal, if you can call it normal distribution, into a standard error, standard deviation based on a sample. So here we insert all the relevant information. We know that the value of x is equal to 110 minus 120, which is our average value, time spent by student to study business statistics in a week, divided by 20 over square root 30. So 20 is our normal standard deviation divided by square root sample size of 30. So remember, after this, when you have or when you wanted to solve similar question, in order to identify whether you have to divide the standard deviation by 30 or by sample size or not, you need to at first identify whether you have the information about the sample size. I repeat, in order to know or in order to tell whether you have to use the standard error or a normal standard deviation like this one, you have to look into the information about the sample size. when you are given the information about the sample size, and then after that you are required to identify the probability for a certain or specific X value, then in that case you have to divide the normal distribution with the product or with the square root of the sample size, because you know, in order to determine the probability, you have to take into account on the fact that you are estimating the probability for a normal distribution based on a sampling process. So here we back to the question. So 110 or minus 110, 20, we have negative 10. We divide with the product of the division between standard deviation and our sample size, which is 3.6515. So the z value based on this question is equal to negative 2.74. Again, in this case, our z value is equal to negative 2.74. So z value is negative, just like question A. So since z value is negative, please refer to the normal distribution table where z are all negative in value. So this is an example. This is an example of a normal distribution table that you can use, that you can refer in order to identify the probability based on a specific z value. As I mentioned during previous session, inside this table we have informations. This information represents the probability based on specific z value. For example, when z value is equal to negative 2.91, our probability is equal to 0.0018. So back to the question, we know that z value is equal to negative 2.74. We refer back to the distribution table, negative 2.74. Just to confirm, negative 2.74, 2.70, 2.71, 2.72, 2.73, and 2.75. So this is the probability. Okay, so this is the probability when z is equal to negative 2.74. The probability is equal to 0.0031. Okay, so probability is equal to 0.0031. But if you refer back to the question, of course, if we wanted to answer question A and B, all that we have to do is to directly translate that the probability is equal to 0.31%. But in this case, you have to read the question carefully, because the question wanted you to identify the probability that the average time spent for studying exceeding 110 minutes. So if it exceeding certain X value, in this case 110 minutes, so if it exceeds the X value, if you wanted to determine the probability based on X value that exceeds, I repeat, if you wanted to determine the probability that exceeds certain X value, you have to subtract the probability that you obtained before by 1. So in this case, we know that the probability is equal to 0.0031. We have to subtract by 1. 1 minus 0.0031. Here we obtain probability that is equal to 99.69%.